In May 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddux said goodbye to his sister and went for a walk. This was not unusual for a nature lover and a free spirit such as Joshua, but little did his sister know at the time, she wouldn't see her brother again for 7 years. And this would be the last time she'd see him alive. Today on Crime Diaries, we head to Colorado and explore the bizarre death of Joshua Maddux. Joshua Maddux lived in Woodland Park, a small city in Teller County, Colorado, nestled among the natural grandeur of Pike National Forest. Josh stood 6 feet tall, weighed 150 pounds, and possessed an apparently inventive mind and a free spirit. He maintained a carefree attitude toward life, grew his hair long, adored music, played the guitar, and spent a good deal of his leisure time writing. At school, he was an intelligent student who appeared to be well-liked and well-known. Josh lived with his father Mike and 2 sisters, Kate and Ruth, after his mother and father divorced. He left his house on May 8, 2008, informing his sister Kate that he was going for a walk because he adored nature and sometimes went out trekking alone. His sister didn't feel this was unusual and wasn't concerned about the farewell. But when he didn't return that evening, concerns set in. With Josh having always been such a free spirit, the anxiety was initially dismissed as overthinking. However, as the days passed and Josh remained absent, his father took the abrupt departure more seriously and eventually called the police 5 days later on May 13th to report him missing. The searches were extensive, examining the neighborhood and surrounding Parkland area. Days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and still, no trace of Joshua has been found, as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. The hope of finding Josh began to dwindle, and his sister Kate expressed how she had always hoped he had simply left town to pursue his music or a different life, and she clung to that hope. They had no reason to assume Josh had gotten into any mischief, and he'd not shown any signs pointing towards depression, despite the fact that Josh's older brother Zachary committed suicide 2 years prior to his disappearance on June 1st, 2006, a week before his high school graduation. Despite this trying time, his family noticed that Josh was doing well and was joyful at the time of his disappearance. The police had no cause to believe he was involved in any criminal activity and hence designated him as a missing person. The hunt continued, and the case file remained open. Mike went so far as to retain ownership of the family house following the family's relocation just in case Josh returned, as it would have been the only place he would have known to go. But news of Josh remained stagnant. That is, until 2015, when a local builder named Chuck Murphy made a distressing discovery. Chuck Murphy, a builder from nearby Colorado Springs, was in the process of dismantling his old wood cabin in 2015. The cabin was situated on a big plot of land that was surrounded by thick pine trees. The cabin had been abandoned for almost a decade and had fallen into severe disrepair. Chuck had decided to remove the building to make way for property development, and at the time had arrived in August to begin removing the deteriorating structure. He purchased the cabin in the 1950s. It was previously known as Thunderhead's Ranch Homestead, a notorious drinking and gambling complex owned by Big Bert Bergströms. Bergströms immigrated to America from Sweden in 1912 and immediately began operating the Thunderhead Inn as an eating and drinking establishment following the repeal of Prohibition. He did, however, operate the ranch illegally as a gambling den and was rumored to offer prostitution on the side. He was apprehended by the FBI, but the jury, no doubt enjoying a taste of what Bert had to offer, immediately found him not guilty. Chuck's brother had resided in the cabin until 2005, but since then, it had been converted into a storage facility, and Chuck had paid little attention to the property. Animals had been a problem, and the interior had an unappealing odor. Chuck made the horrible discovery of a young man's body squeezed into a fetal position with his knees above his head when they demolished the chimney and entered the interior. He contacted the police, who arrived with the county coroner, who utilized dental records, and with the assistance of a forensic odontologist, they confirmed the identity of the corpse as that of Joshua Maddux. who was found less than 1 mile from his family's home. The Maddux family was taken back at the discovery of Josh's body. His sister Kate said, quote, "The situation doesn't make any sense at all. We were really expecting him to be anywhere else in the world, and he was actually very close. The only thing we can figure is he was an 18-year-old kid checking out a cabin. It had already been abandoned for a long time, and a horrible accident happened." Al Bourne, the coroner for Teller County, conducted an autopsy and discovered no signs of drug use in Josh's system. He remarked to the press, quote, "The hard tissue showed no signs of trauma. There were no broken bones, no knife marks, there were no bullet holes. There are, so far, no answers to a number of things. It's very confusing." The cabin was located on Meadowlark Lane, just 2 blocks from the Maddux family home, but had been ignored during the searches. The old edifice exhibited no signs of life. It was just camouflaged from suspicion due to its own monotony, essentially gum on the wall in the town. Chuck Murphy, the cabin's owner, had visited infrequently, but on the occasions when he was required to check in, he had not seen anything peculiar about the property. The cottage stood in the center of a huge plot of land, surrounded by towering pines and set back 50 feet from the roadway. According to police, if Josh had yelled for help, no one would have been able to hear him, regardless of the fact that there were no adjacent residences. The coroner continued, "It was not instant death. How he died is only a matter of speculation, but we know he did not starve to death because that takes many weeks. So then you go down the chain, and you have dehydration, which can take just a few days, and the other thing would be hypothermia, which could take a day or 2. We have no evidence to say which came first." Finally, on September 28, 2015, almost 7.5 years from the day he went missing, Bourne issued a verdict of accidental death. After failing to establish any rational cause, Bourne implied that Josh had fallen down the chimney and became ensconced in the masonry. He decided that the most likely cause of death was hypothermia, given the temperature had plummeted to -6°C at its lowest around the time of his departure. Chuck Murphy, on the other hand, considered this result unsatisfactory. Chuck immediately questioned the coroner's conclusion of accidental death. Bourne testified that Josh's position in the chimney appeared to be a voluntary act to gain entry, but when Chuck heard this, he testified that this would have been impossible. The chimney had been constructed 20 years prior and was fitted with steel rebar, a big thick wire mesh suspended from steel hooks that was meant to prevent animals and rubbish from becoming lodged inside of the chimney or entering the cabin. This sparked a subtle but public exchange between the builder and the coroner, with Bourne responding that the grate may have been rusted or corroded. However, Bourne stated that during the demolition, all of the metalwork was collected and placed in the back of a truck to be scrapped, which would explain why the mesh was not clearly identified by the coroner, because it wasn't near the chimney, if it was even still on site during the coroner's visit. Bourne revisited the case 3 days after his first conclusion, a concession to Murphy. However, it was not just the rebar that cast doubt. Several other pieces of information made no sense to Murphy, leading him to distrust the coroner's report. The dots were simply not connecting. For one thing, there was the unexplained relocation of a large wooden breakfast bar that had been removed from a kitchen wall and hauled over to block access to the chimney from inside the cabin. This was almost certainly why Chuck had failed to notice anything remarkable about the chimney in the first place. However, the mystery remained as to who tore the breakfast bar from the wall and why. Josh's body was also discovered in a fetal position, with his legs raised over his head and his torso dislocated. To obtain such a posture, he would have needed to enter the chimney head first. This was a unique stance to say the least, and Bourne had previously stated that he believed it would have required 2 people to arrange him in this manner. Additionally, there was one more question that stayed with Chuck, and it involved a minor detail. When Josh's body was discovered, he'd been stripped down to his underwear, leaving just a thin thermal shirt. This alone would be unremarkable, but his clothes had been discovered inside of the cabin, folded up next to the fireplace. If we're going with the coroner's explanation, Josh stripped down, folded his clothes, and then climbed in the chimney to die. It just doesn't make any sense. There was one primary suspect in a murder investigation, although he was now incarcerated in a Texas jail and had previously served time in Seattle and Portland prisons for a variety of serious criminal offenses. Bourne was informed of how he was, allegedly, the last individual seen with Josh, but Bourne was unable to put him at the crime scene. He also doubted that the man could have positioned Josh in such a position alone in the chimney. That was the end of that suspect and train of thought as far as Bourne was concerned. However, there was to be a more contemporary twist on the horizon. The facts as they're known was that Josh was found in the chimney of an abandoned cabin approximately 2 blocks from his parents' house. The coroner determined that the body had been there for almost 7 years and declared the death accidental, ruling that Josh had most likely climbed down the chimney in an attempt to gain access to the residence and gotten stuck, which, considering the corpse's age, did not seem too ludicrous, except that, in addition to Josh's final sighting with Andy, the suspect in question, immediately before Andy's stabbing spree, someone called in to claim to hear Andy bragging about having, quote, placed Josh in a hole. Andrew Richard Newman was Andy's full name. He was arrested in New Mexico on suspicion of a fatal stabbing. He was also a member of a band called the Bombers in high school, which was well known and appeared to be well liked. Although he appears to have left the state and traveled nomadically throughout the country following his high school graduation, he maintained contact with a few of his former classmates. One would suppose that pairing Andy and Josh is not a great leap of the imagination. They shared common hobbies and philosophies about life. The case of Joshua Maddux is confusing for a variety of reasons. It appears reasonably safe to assume that Chuck Murphy is to be believed regarding the rebar in the chimney. After all, why would he lie about its existence in the first place? He was only the owner of the property with no personal attachment to the case. However, when one considers the other outlying factors, such as the garments by the fireplace, the breakfast bar dragged to conceal the hearth, and the multiple tip-offs concerning Andy, the largest mystery is possibly why Andy wasn't detained for questioning at the very least. Whether or not the case will ever be reopened or further probed remains to be unknown. However, it has remained dark for the past 2 years, and the county coroner's official conclusion still stands. What are your thoughts about the death of Joshua Maddux? Let us know in the comments section. Also, be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to get the latest updates. You've been listening to Crime Diaries, and until next time, don't be another statistic.